Everybody, Daniel here from Basement Tech. Regular watchers of the channel will remember that I'm converting this CNC Shark from its proprietary controller and software to Linux CNC. Like I've done in some of the other videos, I'll give you a quick tour of changes I've made since the last time we talked, and then talk about the subject of this video. In the last video, we talked about mechanically mounting, electrically connecting, and testing out this inductive proximity switch for the y-axis minimum and y-axis home. Since that video, I went ahead and sort of rinsed and repeated on the other side of the y-axis for the y-axis maximum switch. In addition to the y-axis maximum travel switch, I implemented this limit switch for the z-axis. I took the standard 4 steps we talked about last time, implemented a trip dog, a switch, wired it back into an input on the G540, and configured Linux CNC to recognize it. I haven't yet implemented what would be called the Z-axis maximum negative travel switch. Usually you crash the tool before you get that far, so some think this isn't necessary. I may implement it to protect that lead screw from going too far in the end, but I'll save that for maybe a second priority. To round out the discussion of limit switches, I just wanted to point out there are many sizes and shapes of sensor elements that you can use for a limit switch. This one, I wanted to point out, probably is not a good choice. It's a reed switch or a magnetically activated switch where you would put a magnet on the moving part and this would sense when the magnet comes close. I find these to be a bit unpredictable and not repeatable, so I wouldn't choose that, although it is an option. This is a very curious one that I just happen to have in the junk box. On one side is a optical sender, and on the other side is an optical receiver, and when it gets close to something that's very reflective, it trips. So that may be useful. I've never used it. Might be interesting. A more typical one would be to have these two elements facing each other with a gap in between. That would be interrupted by a little flag mounted on the moving element of the axis. This one I'm just showing to say no matter how big your machine, there's a switch for you. Although the guts of this is probably just one of those little clicky switches, this actuator is meant for a very large machine with a lot of metal, and its output, however, is just like the little switches. So if you need something big, this guy's for you. In addition to the limit switch work, I took two of these T-slot rails off to be able to access this this lead screw here, cleaned it all up and lubricated it very nicely. I did the same with the X-axis and the Z-axis as well. I think that did make it run a bit smoother. Perhaps more visually exciting is this change where I picked up a different graphical user interface for Linux CNC. I think I mentioned at some point in the past that there are several that are available. This one's clearly more brightly colored, better laid out, and I think it'll serve me well going forward. So in addition to those changes, those improvements which I made since the last video, a couple other things happened in this area. You might notice that Whopper capacitor is gone. I still like the idea of a capacitor. That one was just too big. It is possible for it to be too big. What I noticed was when I switched the power on, the surge to charge that capacitor up was enough to trip the overcurrent on the power supply. It did recover, but I think I'll find a smaller one that'll do the job adequately. The other thing I did was tidy up a little bit of this wiring, and for those of you who were screaming, "Hey Dan, make sure those wires don't end up in that fan," I put a cover on the fan, 3D printed a beautiful tactical teal cover, and I implemented this earth ground bus. I do want to talk a little bit about shielding theory, and that's going to be the topic of the rest of this video. Well, alas, I changed my mind. As I started to build the content for the shielding discussion, I realized there's a lot of it. So I'm going to press send on this update video and close out the limit switch discussion and cover shielding in the next video. It's going to be a good one, so please tune in. If you like this kind of video, thumbs up, subscribe, and ask for notifications. I suspect you may feel more inclined to do so after the epic shielding video that's coming up next.